I don't think I've ever joined one of these meetings through Facebook. What a meandering journey this has been. Ah, here we go. There. Hey, can everybody see that?
Getting there.
There
Yeah,
we go.
yeah. So let's see here. Oh, get this little thing out of the way. Get a drink of water and we're ready to rock and roll. So, on to the subject, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So what this is about, for those of us on a domestic well, it's, the temptation is just go crazy watering stuff, and put drip system everywhere and just have yourself a good old time doing it. But there's some things that a lot of people don't stop to consider. And one of those is, if you're short cycling your pump, well, we're not advancing pages here. Drip irrigation, let's see. Hey, all right. So drip irrigation, and a lot of this we just talk about, this is for other people to read. A lot of the deal is your pump, your well turns on and off. It pressures up the tank fills, the water runs, the tank goes.
I lost audio.
Yeah, uh-oh, you can't hear me? Let's see. Are we there?
I can hear you, Bill.
Oh, you can hear me? Okay. So your drip irrigation may use a lot less water than the output of your well if you're not thinking about it, if that is not part of your install. And the deal with the pump is a lot of people think, it's fine on and off, on and off. And that's a lot of wear and tear because a pump has the life expectancy is measured in cycle starts, not in gallons or years or anything like that. So if your pump's putting out, say 10 gallons a minute and your drip system's using 3, it's going to go on and off, on and off, on and off all day. And every on and off hammers bearings out of that pump. And of course, also every time it turns on, it draws quite a bit of electricity as compared to when it's just running. So to really get the best out of your domestic well, you need to do a little bit of thinking before you start putting in your irrigation. So what you do is you figure out what you want to, use, how you're going to go about distributing your water, and what the desired operating pressure is for that. Because you'll see, a drip irrigation, sprinklers, all that stuff, all those components are designed to run at a specific pressure. For example, you're putting sprinklers out in your orchard. And if you look at the label on your, say, your Rainbird MaxiPaw box, it'll tell you 35-foot radius at 40 PSI, or 30-foot radius at 35 PSI. So your pressure is part of the factor with determining how much water you're going to use. So you really have to, when you're up, when you're coming off of a well, you have to kind of start in a little bit different direction than if you were living in town and on a meter where the pressure's the same and you know exactly how much you have, and you can put a pressure reducer on it if you need to. You underuse it, it's not hurting anything. Whereas underusing the volume of your well leads to short cycling. So we've got this little thing I call the bucket test. And it can take a little while, it's a bit of fiddling around, but in the long run, what you're going to find is that this is a good thing to do because it'll extend the life of your pump. Well, all your components, the breaker points on your pressure switch, all that stuff, you know, has wear and tear on it. So for the bucket test, the very first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to decide, how am I going to distribute water? So here on this slide, you'll see this is a couple of different things here. On the right is those MaxiPaw sprinklers that I was talking about. And over here on the right where the green arrow is, you can see at 35 PSI, the number 6 nozzle will have a radius of 37 feet and use 2 gallons a minute. So that might be what you're going to use in your corners. You can come down here, you can see the blue one. I don't know, can you see my cursor on this?
Yes.
Okay, so you see the blue nozzle, the number 8 nozzle, has a 38-foot radius and 3.3 gallons per minute. So this is all part of figuring out how you're going to water whatever it is you're watering and how many zones to have. You look down here, here's these little mini sprinklers. This is what I use in my orchard as a replacement to button drippers and stuff like that. This one runs at 30 PSI and you've got a radius and you've got so many gallons an hour. So this is all stuff you have to kind of calculate when you're getting ready to irrigate something off of your drips, off of your domestic well. So one of the first things here, now that we've got that figured out, is you walk into your well house, and you know, because I know there was a time when I had my first well and I was brand new to it and I didn't really understand all those parts. You're going to have a box that looks just like that next to the tank, and that's your pressure switch, and that turns your well on and off. The tank fills to the top to the maximum pressure, it shuts it off. The tank drains down to a lower pressure, and at a set pressure, it'll turn it back on. They come preset. They're down at our hardware store. The ones that they carry are set at a 2040. I have seen the 3050s at Ace, where you had a choice, and they are adjustable. There's a couple little screws inside you can turn to adjust them. One of the main things to remember when you start looking at sprinklers and stuff, what your water pressure is. Because here's an example in the blue box of some geared rotor sprinkler types, real popular for pastures, orchards, that sort of thing. They're real reliable. They don't plug up easy. I just can't say enough good things about those geared rotors, except that on a domestic well, when you start looking at the technical data there in that blue box, you'll see that for these particular sprinklers, the minimum operating pressure is 50, and they're a lot happier at 60 and 75. And some of the geared rotors actually require 80 PSI to operate. So, those are out of the question. You'll never get those out of the well. If you're looking at sprinklers, you're going to go back to something like this, these Rainbird MaxiPaws. They're an impact type, and they have a big radius for things like pastures and orchards, large lawn areas, that sort of thing. And they fall in the operating pressure. So once you figured out what you're going to use for your irrigation, and you know what the pressure is that you're after, you're going to want to go in here to your well house, and you're going to want to check your gauge. get a gauge that of known quality. If in doubt, just compare gauges against other gauges. And when you find a couple of them are the same, those are probably the ones that are right. So here on the right with the green arrow, that's the gauge that we screwed onto that faucet. And a pressure gauge with a hose thread, female hose thread attachment, if you don't already have one, is a real good thing, not just for doing a bucket test, but it's good to go out there and check the pressure on your irrigation system, that sort of thing. It's just a real good thing to know. It'll tell you if things are working out right. If you're being all geeky about it like me and you're thinking, in terms of precipitation rate, well, we go back to this where the same nozzle at 35 pounds is 2 gallons a minute. Same nozzle at 45 is 2.3. Well, if you're being a total geek and calculating precipitation amounts, that's a big difference. So get yourself one of these. You can go down to any nursery or hardware store. You can pick up a pressure gauge with a hose thread. So here in this picture, we're comparing and checking the old one there against the new one there. This is also a real good time, if you don't know for sure, to turn the well on and see at what pressure it shuts off. And in this case, I think it shut off at 20. And then check and see what the on and off is. This one was kicked on at 20 and off at 40, something like that. And one of the reasons I bring this up is, a little well ownership here. If that thing, the points start getting kind of toasty and they don't work like they should, sometimes it'll be going, instead of 2040, it might be, 15, 26 or just anything like that. The deal is that 20-pound spread has a lot to do with how often your well is on and off when you're using it for things. If the points get a little toasty and it's kicking on at 30 and off at 40, the darn thing is gonna cycle on and off a lot more. So it's just kind of a good thing to think about. So how to determine pressure and volume. So this is the quick rundown on it, is open up some faucets, check your gauge. You may have to open 2 or 3 or 4 even, until you get your well to run steadily at the desired pressure. If you're using electric valves, say we're going for 35 pounds there on those sprinklers. By the time it gets through the other side of that electric valve, you're going to lose about 5 pounds. So you want that to be part of your equation. So you open a few faucets, you go in there and you watch your gauge and let it run for a while. If it's going up real slow, you need to open one just a little bit more. If pressure's dropping kind of slow, you need to kind of close one down. But the idea here is to adjust the flow outside on those faucets to get an accurate pressure versus gallons per minute. And as far as the friction loss, the valves, I just figure about 5 PSI, roughly through a valve. You start getting a lot of fittings, the friction loss picks up. There's all kinds of wonderful information on the internet out there about how to figure your friction loss. Some of it maybe is pretty good, but I think in the case of your water lines at home, it tends to become more art. Your experience out there using it, you'll have a much better idea, I think, than if you actually sit down and do all that rocket science of trying to figure it out ahead of time. So there we go. So things to consider as we're getting ready to design or remodel. You want to make sure all your pipe, all your filters, all your valves are an appropriate size to handle the flow you're dealing with. Because it's kind of pointless to do all this work and then try to run it through a valve. If you figure you're needing 20 gallons a minute downstream of the valve and you buy a valve that will only pass 15, you're kind of spitting in the wind. And what's going to happen then is you'll have a restriction, your pump's going to short cycle anyway, and everything downstream of that valve is going to be cut short on water. And again, the more fittings, the more friction loss. So all that said, the rubber meets the road. So here's an example. Matter of fact, this was over at your house, Dusty. We wanted to have 32 PSI downstream of the valves. We were putting in a sprinkler system. So we determined at that, that we needed to have 37 PSI line pressure. Now, you can go off of the gauge in the well house, but you know, we were talking about that friction loss and everything. Well, if you have a faucet out there, you know, say right in the same general neighborhood as where you're installing drip or sprinklers or whatever, away from the well house in the same location, it's actually a whole lot better. So here's a faucet just right straight across the driveway from where we were going to put in the valves. So the target pressure is 37 PSI, and that is going by our data right here. So we took this sheet and we figured that that was what we needed. So we hooked up our gauge right out there in the yard. So we opened 2 valves completely and just let them blast. And we watched it, and the needle was climbing, you know, to the point where it would shut off. Then it would run down to the on pressure again and come back on and gradually build. And while we're at this part, I'm going to talk about, you know, with that 20-pound fluctuation, if your well is cycling on and off, and having already looked at that data sheet for sprinkler nozzles, and this applies to everything, you know, emitters, soaker, you name it. Well, at a lower PSI, your flow rate is reduced. So if your well is going on and off, you might be over pressuring, say, a soaker hose and blowing it out at the point where the well is going to shut off. Or as the pressure goes down when it's not running, you're going to lose water pressure. If you're using sprinklers, you'll be able to see them. They'll spray like crazy, and then they'll just kind of dribble out and spray like crazy again, which is what, you know, besides the fact it's short cycling your pump, you're not getting even water, particularly, like I was saying earlier, if you're inclined to be picky about how much water you're using. I like to use exactly enough and not a gallon more and not a gallon less. And water pressure is a real big part of that equation. So we got 2 faucets wide open, still not running completely. So we opened a third one and we cracked it a little bit open. And finally, adjusting those faucets, we got right here on 37 PSI line pressure, and nothing moved. It ran 5 minutes and didn't move. So now we know we've got it, right? So we go out to the first faucet. We take a container with measurements, which my cool can works really well because inside it's marked in gallons and liters. So with a stopwatch, you can see here's JR over here with a stopwatch, and here's me over here with the hose. So we would time the filling of that container. And then we would write it down on the notepad, how many gallons a minute we were getting. One of the first times I did this, I just, without thinking, turned the faucet off as I walked away, and it was like, dang, I just messed that up. So I'd start over. So you go to the second faucet, time it, and record it. Go to the third faucet, time it, and record it. And you add those three figures together, and that's going to tell you exactly how many gallons per minute you're getting at that pressure right there. And you may have to do this a couple of times because if you're using different materials for your irrigation, they operate at different pressures. And you're going to find that, like here at my house, at 37 psi, my well produces 10 gallons a minute on the nose. And at 20 psi, my well produces like 12 point something, 12, I forget, 12 something. It's written on the side of the tank. So if you're doing a combination of things at your place, different methods, like say you're putting sprinklers in your orchard and you're putting soaker hose on the garden, you're going to have to do different bucket tests. So the helpful hints, which by the way, lessons learned the hard way, that seems to be the best way to remember anyhow. So using your domestic well, and this is one definitely I learned the hard way. I had been accustomed to putting a filter downstream of my valve. Have done that for ages. And when I got this place here in Duncan, it turns out that it pumps just a little bit of sand, not a lot, but it doesn't take much either. A little bit of sand and occasionally a flake of rust from the well casing. And that stuff all goes right on down the line. So you get grit in your valve. What's going to happen is it's going to stop working. The most usual thing that'll happen is you'll get a little piece of grit under the plunger and the solenoid, and it'll just leak all the time. Well, till you clean it. The other thing that can happen is you can get a little piece of grit in the little weep hole, you know, in the diaphragm, and it can plug that up, and your valve will just, it'll come on just fine, but it won't go off. And having a stuck valve is not a good thing. Besides the fact that you're drowning things and wasting water, like if you're using stored rainwater, well, shoot, you know, you can lose a month's supply overnight. So filter the water ahead of the valves. And they're in red, standard Y filters. Another lesson learned the hard way. You can go down to any hardware store and you can buy a Y filter. But those particular Y filters are designed for occasional use and downstream pressure only. So what you have to do is you'll have to find a filter that is designed for constant pressure. They make all kinds of neat filters you can buy in the hardware stores, those whole house filters and stuff. But most of those, you cannot clean the filter, the screen, or the, you know, whatever it is, the paper element. And that gets real expensive, especially because most of them are so fine that and clog so easy that things that could have easily passed a valve without any problem will still stick in them. So what I did here, and I'll go back to it here. Let's see, where is it? The filter that I have in mine looks like a regular Y filter. It's called Spin Clean. You'll see I've got a ball valve on the end of it. This is a wire, regular old Y filter, except it's slightly larger. It's 1 inch. It's designed to handle 140 PSI, which is, my well is off at 40, but it's got a regular wire screen inside of it so you can clean it and reuse it. There's threads on the end. What I have done in the past is I have even hooked a battery operated valve to that to once a day flush it. So the beauty of the spin clean is that when you take off the housing and you get to the screen, in the top, there's a little disc with fins in it. So what it does is it swirls the water around as it goes through the filter. So when you open this valve down here at the bottom where I'm pointing, you open that up and just blast out that filter. There's water swirling around and around and around inside of there that cleans the inside of that screen. So that's a real handy thing to have. And with this filter, my valves don't clog up. It keeps them clean. So back down the road here. So your valves, see, are we through this? Yeah. Oh, and also, so here in the blue box, we have our maximum pressure of 140 PSI. Down below here where I'm pointing, you'll see that when you're purchasing a filter, there are options with the mesh of the actual filter itself and a limit as to how many gallons per minute that filter will pass. Those numbers all have to match up to what it is you're doing. When you're working on your system, you're remodeling, you're adding, be real darn careful, because if you walk into a lot of the hardware stores, a lot of them sell soaker, a lot of them sell emitters, they all have stuff. What you'll find out a lot of times when you get home is something that looks just like what you already had, but a different manufacturer, you might be getting a lake or you might not be getting any water out there. And so often you'll look at, say, for example, you're going to use little micro sprinklers or sprayers in your flower beds. Good way to do it. Well, if you go to, say, dripworks.com, you'll buy a corner, a 90-degree sprayer that might be 8 gallons an hour. Well, now we run down to Ace Hardware, who sells one just as good, except the one at Ace is 3 gallons an hour. They're the same color. So different manufacturers have different color codes and they operate at different pressures. So always make sure you match up your materials, because a mismatch on materials, you'll wind up with dry spots and wet spots and everything else. And that's what we're trying to avoid. So here's an example. Now that we've got our filters good, we know exactly how much water we have, valves are the right size, life is good. So this is just a rough example, rough numbers. So I am putting in a lawn and I need 4 corners, 2 half circles, and 2 full circles. And I'm shopping around for something with a 15-foot radius. Say that's the dimensions of my lawn. So at 30 PSI after the valves, I got 10 gallons a minute. So we've got 3 manufacturers. So here we have 4 quarters, 2 halves, 2 full circles. Manufacturer A. I add up 4 quarter circles. So the quarter circle is 1 gallon per minute times 4 nozzles, 4 gallons. 2 gallons per minute times 2 nozzles, 4 gallons. 2 nozzles at 4 gallons a minute, 8 gallons. So now I've got 16 gallons if I use manufacturer A. That's not quite what we're after here. So we go to manufacturer B and we add it all up and we come out with 20 gallons a minute to water that lawn. We go to manufacturer C, add it all up and we come out with 18.08 gallons per minute to water that same lawn. Well, I've got 10 gallons a minute and 20 is evenly divisible. I got lucky. 20 is an evenly divisible number. So manufacturer B is the nozzles that I'm using. We've got 2 equal zones. Doesn't always work out that good. You know, especially if you already have a lawn, you can, you know, when you're designing a lawn, if you're putting something new in a lawn, whether it's, or an orchard, you know, it's not just lawns, orchard, a garden with soaker hose, all that stuff. You can shop around if you've already got something and you can get close enough to make it work with a little shopping. Or if this is a new garden, a new orchard, you can always just sort of adjust the area to fit, which actually manufacturer B at my place, that's the reason manufacturer B fits so well, was that I just kind of adjusted the size of the turf area to make everything work out. So adjusting your area is a real easy way to go. Now, if it was in already and I didn't have manufacturer B, it might be possible to use manufacturer C, because when we're using slightly less, the pressure is going to increase, and as pressure increases, the nozzles put out more. That might have worked, but since we found something that we knew would work, that's what we went with. Okay, flat soaker. So here, I'm putting in a garden, and I really like that flat soaker. And if you look, you'll see there's low flow and high flow. There's 2 ways of looking at high flow and low flow. Low flow on heavy soil, you know, it runs slower and longer, so you can water deeper without getting as much of a wet spot on the surface. I like the very little wet on the surface because that's what makes the weeds grow. If I use the high flow, I've got quite a bit of moisture on the surface and weeds. But by the same token, the low flow uses 20 gallons an hour, the high flow uses 40. At 20 gallons an hour and 12 gallons a minute, this low flow results in a pretty large garden, which for me, that's great. You know, the bigger, the better, right? But if I was wanting to cut my garden down in size, I might have gone with the high flow and just dealt with the moisture on the surface and pulled a few more weeds. So here's the math. My well is 12 gallons a minute when the gauge in the well house reads 22 PSI. That's after all the friction loss, the valve, everything. So 12 gallons a minute is 720 gallons an hour. And this is the hose I used, the soaker, 8-inch spacing, low flow. This is what I wanted to use. So it uses 20 gallons per 100 feet at 8 PSI. And 8 PSI is what I wind up with by the time I get way the heck out there from the well house and through a filter and through a valve. I'm winding up, and then through the header pipe, I wind up with 8 PSI on the header pipe, partly because I have done this. 720 feet divided by 720 gallons an hour divided by 20 gallons an hour is 36. So I need 3,600 feet of soaker on my garden by the time it goes downstream of the valve. And the nice thing about downstream of the valve is I don't have to have that exact pressure downstream of the valve. Part of how I get that pressure, if the pressure is too high, I add another line. If the pressure is too low, I take one off. That's where the art comes in as opposed to the math. So 36 times 100 feet of soaker on the garden. And I put the soakers 12 to 16 inches apart in the garden, 2 or 3, depending on if it's something that needs a lot of water or something that's kind of dry. When I can, I like to put them close to the seed bed to get the seed germinated. When the plants start growing, I just move them over as the roots expand. So anyways, this soaker is wonderful stuff. This is what my math is telling me I need right here to get that, see right here, if you notice, flow per 100 at 8 PSI. So I do all this math, I hook it all up, I go in the well house, ta-da, 22 PSI right there next to the tank. I go out to the furthest header pipe in the garden, ta-da, 8 PSI. This is, by the way, this is a low pressure gauge. Usually the one in your well house, it'll have like a scale from 0 to 120 or 0 to 200. When you're talking 6 pounds versus 8 pounds versus 10, this other gauge tends to work better because this is 0 to 30. So it's a little more accurate for low pressure. So anyways, all the math, hooked it up, turned it on, and away it went. Worked like a champ. So the kind of the tail end of this is read the label when you're in buying parts or shopping online. Always read the label. And especially if you're replacing part of what you already have, because not all brands are compatible with one another. Some emitters, like some of the pressure compensating emitters, they're great. They have an operating range, a 2-gallon pressure compensating emitter will be 2 gallons, anywhere from 8 PSI to 60 PSI. But if you're using the old Reed type, 8 PSI, that same 2 gallons, at 8 PSI, you might get a half a gallon, and at 60 PSI, you might get 4. So always read the labels and always, keep in mind the pressure that you're working with. Color codes, say you've got red, say rainbird drippers on your shrubs, and you go to some place that sells another brand like, what's the one, Rain Drip, not Rain Bird, and you grab a pack of red emitters because they looked exactly the same. Well, what you find is that Rainbird red is 2 gallons an hour, whereas Rain Drip, if I'm remembering the name of it right, is 1/2 a gallon an hour, and they look the same. So always be sure of that. If you're in looking for parts, check for the flow rate and the pressure. Not all drippers are the same. Not all sprayers are the same. Not all flat soaker is the same. And if it doesn't have the gallons per hour and the operating pressure on it, on the package, because some places don't, just move on. If you can't get that information, don't buy the part. You may be wasting your effort. And if it does have that information, compare that information against any materials already in use, because you don't want to mix things up on a line. Say back to the flower bed, we're using sprayers, and we put it in with some Pepco sprayers. One got plugged up. It's August. We're not going to wait for one to come in the mail. We'll trot down to Ace and we'll grab a sprayer. You might be getting a lake in the middle of your bed, or the middle may not be getting enough water if the sprayers that you had were 30 psi, 4 gallons an hour, and the one you put in is 25 psi, 8 gallons an hour. So you always want to make sure things are compatible. So I think that's the end of the slideshow. Any questions?
We did have a question in the chat, Bill. Lisa from snowy Nebraska. It's also snowy here, which is fabulous. Ask, I would like to add a farm faucet to my garden. How can I determine if my residential well will support this added use?
Let me see. I would like to add a farm faucet.
And if she wants to unmute, we could unmute her and she could ask.
Yeah. Unmute her.
Nicole, could you yeah.
They can unmute themselves. I have removed that parameter, so
Well, cool.
they can.
Okay, so the farm faucet you're talking about, frost free, is that what we're talking about? No. Okay, so I'm guessing that's a frost-proof hydrant she's talking about. How can I determine if my residential well will support this added use? Well, the big thing is, what are we calling use? Can I run that faucet at the same time I'm doing other things? I mean, your well just puts out a set amount at a set pressure. To have a faucet out there, I don't see anything at all wrong with hooking up a faucet to your line. You just may not be able to run it and something else at the same time. Is that making sense, Lisa?
I guess she hasn't been able to unmute. Let me see.
Oh, okay.
Something in the chat.
Oh yeah, still can't unmute.
Hello, can you hear me now? This is
there,
Lisa.
by golly.
Hi, how's everyone?
Good. So you're in snow, huh?
Oh, we had 12.5 inches in Omaha the night before last.
Wow.
So schools are half remote, we're half remote now because of the COVID, but some schools are fully open, but they're still struggling to get students into school.
Yeah.
The snow. So yeah, it's pretty snowy here today. It's one of our heaviest snows, and I think they said 73 was the last. But the sun is out, and I'm thinking about spring. We've been in a drought for 7 years, to the extent that some of the tops of trees have died. Then we had those extreme floods where there were ice jams, and the cities of Fremont and Valley were islands. You couldn't come into the area, and they had to send caravans of trucks with supplies because the people there were running out. So that's where my property is. I'm in a drought, flood type of situation. And I do not live at the property. It's a home with 1.5 acres that I do my gardening on. And as I age, dragging that 100-foot hose is getting a little cumbersome. So I would like to tap into my existing well and just put on, now I'm learning maybe I should have 2 farm faucets, but either put a farm faucet in or something to make life easier for me.
Yeah.
At the garden that I volunteered at, the Hope Garden, which produces food for distribution, they had a farm faucet at the end of each row.
Mhm.
I was thinking more of a single farm faucet, although now I'm seeing maybe I should have two and split it between the two gardens, basically large gardens. Uh, where do I even start? That's how I found this. I'm in the right place. I
Yeah.
was searching to see who could do the work. My local landscaper doesn't have any idea how to do any of these calculations. Uh,
Well, so
so,
basically you're just wanting to run some faucets out there, right?
well, yeah, I see drip irrigation is not going to be a very uh, choice method because it is a residential property. And if I did want to use uh, the shower or the dishwasher at the same time, I mean, it's slow enough as it is. Just
Yeah.
to fill up a bucket, you go one potato, two potato, and you could come back, in 5 minutes, and there your bucket would be about 3/4 full.
Yeah, so it's a low volume is what you're saying, right?
And the volume is higher outside from the house spigot than it is inside the house. And I don't know why that is, but after hearing your explanations of how all these systems are interrelated, maybe there is something preventing my house from getting good water pressure inside where it is a little bit better outside.
Well, there it could be something as simple as, because like typically people will put a shut-off valve on a house so you can shut it off without turning everything else off, for like faucet repairs, or like in places where it's cold, a lot of times people put a shut-off in a drain. It could be as simple as there's a shut-off valve that never got open all the way. Have you checked to see if the little strainers on your faucets and stuff are clogging?
I have not. That is a good idea.
Hmm.
Um, it does, when I wash my hands, I'm satisfied with the amount of water I'm getting. But when I'm trying to fill up a bucket, that's when I notice
Hmm.
it's taking a very long time.
Yeah.
So that's something good to check into.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if there's a noticeable difference inside and outside, that just means there's a restriction somewhere.
Okay, that's one thing for a professional to look at past the little strainer for me.
Hmm. Yeah.
Uh, what is the best uh, type of professional to do this calculation and do the installation
For the faucets,
for the outdoor faucets? Yes.
well, I would just put a faucet wherever I'm big on as many faucets as you can get. You just may not be able to open them all at the same time, you know,
Okay.
and especially, I'm getting to the point now where getting up and down, some days my knees get a little creaky and crackly. So
I know the feeling.
I like a faucet, I'd put a faucet every 20 feet if I could. I mean, you may only be able to use one at a time, but just turn it on and see. Just, check it out.
Well, compared to lugging that 100-foot hose from one side of the garden to the other side of the garden,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
would that would make a lot of sense. But
Yeah. Yeah.
so would any irrigation company that installs regular sprinklers on a lawn have the expertise to um, do this installation? And if I wanted emitters on maybe
Oh,
some of my trees, my fruit
I'm
trees.
sure. Do you have a nursery that does grounds maintenance nearby?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Yes.
I
Omaha.
would go
Everybody
talk to
knows.
them because they probably, repair stuff. And the guy that fixes a lot of stuff generally tends to know a little more, how to avoid fixing things than somebody who just installs.
Okay. That's a good point.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll have to look around for someone since um, this is all new to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. My neighbor did a self installation, but he's an engineer. And I did watch him put his lines in, trench them in.
Uh-huh.
So, okay. Well, I've really enjoyed this information. I've been looking all over for it. And I really thank you for putting it out here for us home gardeners or
Oh, you're welcome.
serious gardeners to understand at least the behind the scenes work that a professional would do.
Yeah.
Not do it myself.
Well,
Thank
I've
you,
seen a
Jen.
lot of people just wipe out their pumps, with drip irrigation. So it's kind of become one of my pet peeves, is this, bucket test thing. So
Yeah, I'm definitely going to try that when the snow melts.
yeah.
Thanks for your question, Lisa. That helps us get a better picture. I'm wondering, Bill, if you would like to make the slides available for people, or if not,
Yeah,
that's fine. Okay, we would have them on our website. Everybody?
sure. I can send them, or actually I could put them in box where you could get at them. I don't think they send very well.
Oh, yeah, that's a point. Okay,
Yeah.
sounds good. Or you
Okay.
can change them to a PDF and they might send well.
Yeah, well, the PDF goes fine, I guess. Yeah, I'll just change them to a PDF. That's the easiest.
Okay, great. And people can look at those charts and stuff. I have a question because this is pretty new for me too. What was that? The head valve or something? The head something? Where is
Oh,
that?
the header pipe.
Mm-hmm.
When you're using, soaker, the flat soaker,
Mm-hmm.
will attach to something, right? You've got one pipe that runs along the top of the rows, and then you got the soakers coming off of it.
Mm,
One they
okay.
attach to is the header.
Okay. Thanks. And the valves that you were talking about, that the selenium, are those are irrigation valves you were speaking about?
Yeah, right.
That's
Yeah,
the group?
yeah. Automatic valves. And
Okay.
and even like gate valves, if you're using them manually, a gate valve also has a certain amount of friction loss.
Mm,
Big fan of automatic valves. I've almost forgotten that they even make manual valves. And the reason is the manual valves, you have to remember to go back and shut it off at the right time.
yeah.
And that can sometimes, I have had stuff on manual valves and got up in the morning making coffee and going, oh no, my trees are still watering
Yeah. I've
from
had a
yesterday.
friend who left
Yeah,
the rain
automatic
go
valves
on
are a
and the
real
rain
good
tank emptied,
good
these
thing.
things.
And something that I kind of missed in the presentation, I'll bring it up now. I think I skipped over it. Automatic valves have an operating range, a pressure range.
Mm-hmm.
And if you get to looking at hang this thing up. There we go. Automatic valves have a pressure range, like 15 to 80, something like that. And this is one of those lessons learned the hard way, using collected rainwater and gravity flow. If your valve has a minimum operating pressure of 15, that means that it takes 15 psi to shut it off. It's the pressure that opens and closes the valves. So when you're looking at this stuff and you're thinking in terms of low pressure, low volume, always remember that your valve requires a certain amount of pressure to shut it off.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a good point.
Electric valves, if you're in it to save water, they're really the only way to go.
Mm. Okay. Sounds good. Does anyone else have any questions? All right.
There's
Well,
one here,
we're gonna get
pressure.
back to their day. Bill, did you have something else?
Yeah, there was a question on emitters here.
Okay. Oh, there we go.
Yeah, pressure compensating emitters, they're good. A well, or it doesn't matter where your water's coming from, you do have to filter your water. And well water is as good as any for a pressure compensating emitter. And I think they're better than the other types. more durable, and they don't clog up if you have hot water or hard water. They don't clog as bad.
Hmm.
So, yep. Well, and that's I think that's all the questions then.
I
Oh,
think she had,
pressure variation. Yes. That's why they're called pressure compensating. How they work, there's a little rubber diaphragm inside that as the pressure increases, it bends the diaphragm, reducing the size of the orifice. What they were designed for originally, you've seen like if you drive through, like Mesa or those places on the freeway, and there's those big steep slopes, you've probably 35, 40-foot elevation change top to bottom. And if you're dripping all that stuff, you're watering it with drip irrigation, that 35 or 40 feet of elevation is going to mean the emitters at the bottom are getting twice the pressure as the ones.
Yeah.
That's what they were designed for. But the real benefit of them that I don't think was part of the plan, when the water shuts off, the orifice opens to its maximum diameter. And should there be a little tiny piece of grit in there, that grit will just flush right on through.
Oh, that's cool.
So they're totally awesome.
So I was thinking that they would also be good because if you had like 100-foot run, the pressure at the end of the 100 feet is going to be different than at the beginning, but you still want to have the same gallons per hour emitted. So
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Got it.
So are you using like a pressure regulator or are you using the pressure compensating emitters in your system?
Well, and actually here at my own place, no, I guess I do have a few emitters still. I use I use only the pressure compensating emitters just because they last longer. When they do plug up, you got to throw them away. You can't clean them.
Yeah.
Oh, in some places, like on a flat piece of ground, the reed type, the friction loss emitters, flag emitters, whatever you want to call them, they're kind of nice because you can take them apart while it's running. You can pull the little spiral center out and blast it off with the water and put it back and you're good to go. But if you have any elevation or if it's a really long line, they don't work too well.
Okay.
Yep.
So I wasn't clear, like when you were doing the opening up of the two lines and running the two faucets, I suppose they were, and running the water until it evened out. Is that supposed to like mimic what it is in use so that it would even out, or is it always going to fluctuate as you're using it because it's the nature of it being a well?
Okay, so on a well, so the way it works, your tanks are pressured up. When you first open that faucet, or a big valve, you could probably get 25 gallons a minute because the tank is emptying.
Yeah.
But what you're after, say you go out and you open a faucet and you go back and look, is the well running continuously or is it on and off, on and off? If it's still shutting off, if it's still building pressure, open a second one and then maybe a third or whatever. Maybe the second or the third one, you'll have to open it halfway. But what your aim is for your well to just run, to just run steady at a given pressure. Say
Okay.
I want 35 pounds for orchard sprinklers. And say I'm running 9 gallons a minute. Well, if my well is putting out 10 at 9 gallons a minute, it's going to build up pressure with that surplus gallon and it's going to shut off. Then it's going to drain again and come back on.
Oh, okay, so that was like to help you design how much use you need to use in order
Right.
for it to within that 2040 range, basically.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. What you
Okay.
want is, like we're looking at the charts. I'm going to put sprinklers in my orchard and I need 35 PSI on the line to make them work. So you'll go off of your line pressure with a gauge and you'll open some faucets or something. And if there's less, if your pressure is lower, just crack one down, crank it, just close it a little tiny bit until, and this takes a while. I mean, sometimes you hit it right on the head, but generally speaking, it takes a little fiddling around uh,
Mhm.
until your line pressure remains at exactly the pressure you want. Then go out there with a marked container and find out how many gallons per minute at that pressure you're getting. And you'll find that, like for flat soaker, and I only want 22 pounds, it would have to be a separate test because the when there's less back pressure, your pump moves more water. Does that make sense? Am I
Yeah,
okay?
yeah, because it has more, less pressure ahead of it to go. Yeah.
Right, less resistance.
Yeah.
And one thing about you'll find that when you design your system and your well just hums steadily through the whole thing, you can go from zone to zone. Because I think I'm here at my place, I'm running, I don't know, probably 15, 16 zones on any given day. And you just line it up and the well comes on once and everything waters and it shuts off once. And you'll find that once you get everything figured out and working right, you'll notice your electric bill is a little bit less too, because your pump really draws the current when it's pressuring up. So you're not only saving your well, but you're saving money on electricity at the same time.
Okay, thank you.
So, Bill, I had a question. What's kind of like the worst case scenario for a well replacing a pump with this kind of too rapid cycling? Is it something that could happen in a matter of like months or years or?
Well, and it depends on how many cycles. I personally know somebody over there in the near Elfrida that burned up a pump and, it's down in the hole 400 feet. So that was real expensive. A 2-horse pump, 400 feet down,
Yeah.
just an arrow. And they burned it up, I think he said in a year and a half.
Mm-hmm.
And I had been recommending this bucket test to him, and no, that's too complicated. We're just going to do it, right? So they got the new pump in. They hooked up their drip system, and he went out there and started counting. And he figured in a 24-hour period, I forget, hundreds of starts because he's using 1.5 gallons a minute on a 2-horse pump,
Yeah.
and so you can toast one pretty quick. On the other side of it, I know people that have got 15, 20 years out of a pump by being careful about how they use it. So big difference, and it will never ever fail that your pump will quit in August when you really need to water now.
Right.
On a Sunday when nobody answers the phone.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you're using it inside, that's not good either.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think we got a good idea of the concept.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Would you be amenable to people emailing you with other questions?
Oh, that's fine. Go right ahead. You bet. That's my job,
Yeah. Let me type that in. What is it?
WRC.
WRC. Oh yeah.